It just so happens that as I began spending time with this text, it was also celebrating my 30th anniversary with my beloved. And as I read the language, the poetry of love, it felt also fitting for us. But then as I surveyed the tumult and turmoil of a world in crisis, the continuing cases and deaths from COVID-19 and the fighting over masks and vaccines, the military withdrawal from Afghanistan and the humanitarian crisis of violent repression and score settling for those who aided American troops over these many years, the Kabul airport bombing that killed over 170 people and 13 U.S. service members aiding those seeking to get away from the turmoil. I kept wondering if a love poem from the Song of Solomon is enough of a word for the moment. Is love able to bring some insight into the morass? And with all the punditry and policymaking and expert analyses applied to the big issues and questions we are now confronting, it can feel kind of unserious and unrealistic to exhort people and leaders to choose love in response. And yet, it is often the faithful readers of sacred texts, those readers who are inspired by the witnesses to God's steadfast love in the midst of slavery, genocide, and persecution, those readers who are inspired by those who were transformed by Jesus' embodiment and commandment to love God and love neighbor. These are the ones who are compelled to call on the world to love in the midst of crisis. And so the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, or the Canticle of Canticles, as it has been called, is a rather confusing, if still quite an appropriate book to read in this moment. The book has been confusing readers as long as it has been included as an authoritative, sacred writing for the faithful. And with all our modern advancements in historical, literary, and form criticism in biblical interpretation, we still wrestle with this book of poetry. Who wrote it? And who were these lovers speaking so boldly to each other? Did they write all of it as a unit, or did several people add verses over time? Is it even poetry in the way we understand it? Whatever it is, and whoever wrote it, there is no denying that the theme of the Song of Solomon is love. And so perhaps it is always appropriate to reflect on the theme of love when things go really bad and when we become disconnected from what is good and right and just. But this theme of love in the Song of Solomon is personal and intimate, some would say even private, featuring the erotic poetry of two lovers, utterly and unwaveringly committed and connected. In the passage we read today, over and over, the poet speaks about my beloved, the voice of my beloved. My beloved is like a young stag. My beloved speaks. The language is so flowery and intimate, rather sweet and sappy, and so erotic that many faithful readers have been a little bit embarrassed and scandalized by it, and are satisfied to pursue the reading solely as allegory saying to us that perhaps this poetry is about God's love of Israel or Jesus' love for the church. And while those allegories have a rich history and provide satisfying theological truths about how God's steadfast love builds up the people, I hope we allow this expression of love invite us to see the power and mystery of love in all of the ways it is expressed, in all of its manifestations, as the antidote to the ugliness and nastiness of a world that is broken. The ugliness and nastiness of war and pandemic. The cry of the poet that her lover speaks to her to arise and come away with him is not a meaningless recitation of inconsequential romantic words. You know what I'm talking about, like we were with kids in school. Oh, I love you. Do you love me? No. This connection between lovers is animated by a material change in the atmosphere, in the entire environment. Even if the words are ultimately metaphorical or allegorical, the love portrayed here flourishes with newness and possibility, for now the winter is past. The rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing has come. Whenever this was written, and whoever wrote it, regardless of the identities of the two people involved or the allegories we can still glean from it, there is truth about the power and mystery of love. It changes things. It changes things. How real love, that active, transformative, committed kind of love, transforms the spaces and places that have gone bad. Transform the spaces and places that are overwhelmed by violence, oppression, and domination. Love changes things. And so the language of these lovers may be embarrassing and scandalous to our ears. Their passion and eroticism may cause some discomfort, but they open a window into the divine human drama of committed covenant relationship. You see, that flowery romantic language reveals the possibilities, the abundance that accompany covenant commitment. And that invitation to arise, my love, and come away with me reveals the demands and expectations of love. That's right. If love is to be more than just a feeling, it comes with a host of expectations. If love is to be more than just the meaningless rhetoric we throw around about love, it comes with some demands on our time, on our hearts, on our commitments. If love is to be more than a lyric soon forgotten in the whirl of crisis, it must be cultivated and nurtured, constantly shown, offered, and tended to as a way to overcome what separates us and distorts our humanity. The poet's very claims and flowery language evinces someone who cultivates and nurtures love. And that begs the question, how do we talk about love? How do we cultivate and nurture love? How do we make love more than just rhetoric? How do we show love? How do we make love victorious? Oh, we have become quite comfortable with the use of the word love. We know how to say it sweetly. I bet many of you know you can say it sweet. We know how it feels both romantically and platonically. We know how painful love can be, especially when we lose it. We even have some authoritative voices to which to appeal, to talk and think about love. The eloquence and expressions of Jesus, Martin Luther King, Archbishop Desmond Tutu on the power and mystery of love. The images and metaphors of love from Shakespeare and Browning and Keats. The lyrics and melodies of love from Gershwin and Berlin to the Beatles, Etta James and Whitney Houston. We are surrounded by convincing rhetoric about love, the power of love, the beauty of love in all of its expressions. And yet, we come up short when the world needs to see the kind of love that transforms the space, that transforms places. The church becomes less confident in her witness to the power of love when war, violence, pandemic, environmental degradation threaten what is good. But whether as allegory or example, what is our response to God's loving voice, God's call, God's invitation to come away, my love? Are we willing to hear the voice of God beckoning us to get up, to get out into the world, to trust the pull of God's infectious, unconditional love for us? Do we take the posture of one who deeply loves and is deeply loved, and hasten to be near God and to one another, dwelling together in peace and safety as an answer to the pain and suffering in the world? I'm talking about nurturing and cultivating love such that our unions and our expressions of love feel like a time of singing, and all around us winter is past and the rain is over. Oh, I get it. Someone is thinking that love is still not concrete or effective enough to answer all of these hard crises of the day. I believe that. I understand that feeling. But those who are loved and love in return can be the answer to the crisis we face. The good news is that the voice of God, whose steadfast love endures forever, beckons us to God, to the very being of God. That voice embraces us into the very being of God. In our relationship with God, in our covenant with God, we are showered in a radical love that dissolves all of the categories and boundaries that separate us from God and from each other. In the darkest, you say, but how do you know? How do you know? I want to see it. I want to know what you're talking about. Because in the scariest, think back, in the scariest, darkest moments, love often breaks through. Oh, you're going to look at the papers later on. We're going to be looking at the news. You're going to be looking at what's going on. And we're going to find out in between the reports of loss, death, and destruction, there will be stories of the victorious breakthrough of love in the midst of the worst kinds of experiences. Love that saves a life. Love that displays compassion to one thought to be an enemy. Love that shares food and shelter and support to desperate neighbors. Love that brings together a community to lift each other up. You're going to see it every single time. Love breaking through. That's how I know that we are immersed in a radical love. Just yesterday, the theologian Fleming Rutledge, wrestling just like I am, just like us, with the crisis, the bad news of the crises of the world, tweeted what I consider to be a gospel message in just a few characters. I wouldn't have said it the way she said it because she's a little bit more conservative than I am, but I still think it holds. She declared, I don't know any theological way to interpret the news of planetary illness and good intentions gone wrong except through the lens of New Testament cosmology. The entire created order is falling and in the grip of the powers of sin and death. And over these powers, only love is the victor. that spoke to me. Love is the victor. You see, the mysteries of love come clear when we get up, when we arise and respond to God's call. When we take the risk of extending ourselves beyond what is safe, familiar, and comfortable to be the very witnesses to the newness and possibilities of love. That's why the poet evinces no hesitation or embarrassment about the very intimate, erotic experience of her great love for her lover, because the covenant itself bears witness to how beautiful and abundant life can be because of love. Love changes things. The mysteries of love come clear when we can actually arise and go away with God, with the God of our understanding, leaving behind all that separates us from what is good and right and just and neighborly, to embrace the newness, abundance, and flourishing that comes with it. Love is an act of relinquishment. Relinquishing our hold on power, security, and success so that all God's beloved can know the warmth of spring and that time of singing that we talk about. Yes, we live with this tragedy of a failed war in Afghanistan and the loss of life throughout the entirety of the conflict, and more life to be lost as conflicts arise all across the world. We mourn the losses from COVID-19, even as we lament how polarized we've become and lose relationships because of our differences. But through it all, there stands before us the great gift of love. The great gift of love, the great gift that we can embrace and nurture and cultivate when all else fails. And when we do, we embrace that love, and we arise and go away with God in that love. When we show that love, the mysteries of love come clear. Amen.